nutritionally, there has been enough studies that show that there is no nutritional difference between organic and non-organic. You'd be surprised to know the mildest in terms of vitamin loss is microwave. Then eventually, when Indians discovered that pressure cooker saves 50% of my gas bill, vitamin B and vitamin C, those are the only two things that actually get destroyed in the process of heating. Without cooking, most things are irritable. Sugar is sugar. As far as your body is concerned, it can't tell the difference between sucrose that came from jaggery and sucrose that came from white sugar. The single biggest cause of lifestyle diseases is diet.
Not a chef, but cooks well engineered meals daily. You're a scientist, but can help you understand and fall in love with science like your school never did. And the author of the amazing book, Masala Lab, The Science of Indian Cooking. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Mr. Krish Ashok, who's going to be helping us to bust some of the biggest myths around food, cooking, and your kitchen. So, welcome, Mr. Krish Ashok, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your health and cooking story, and how has it changed over the years, and how has it impacted your health and well-being in some ways?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. A pleasure being here. So, as you said, I'm not a nutritionist, doctor, or a professional chef, or a scientist for that matter. I'm primarily a software person, in a sense that, and in the sense that good software is fundamentally about breaking things down to simpler, easier, modular, repeatable bits. That's the same philosophy that I sort of bring to cooking, and that's also the reason why I wrote Masala Lab. So my sort of interest in cooking goes back to when I was about a teenager, when I think my mother taught me how to cook. She had a working job, and she essentially trusted the one son of hers that was least likely to cause an LPG explosion in the house, and so that's how I sort of learned to cook. And it wasn't until I went to live in the US that I had to take it more seriously when I started talking to relatives about recipes and so on. That's when I think in my early sort of mid-20s is when I started thinking about the fact that there was a lot of tacit knowledge about cooking that somehow the cookbooks were not capturing, or the recipe books were not capturing, right? The tacit knowledge essentially being that people don't think in terms of recipes. People think in terms of like meta models, right? A dal is a category of dish. It doesn't matter what dal you use. And there are various sub steps, right? So there's a tadka, there's the gravy, there is the acid, whether it's amchur or lime juice or whatever it is. And then there's a finishing tadka, there are spice powders, and everything from a sambar to a Punjabi dal is still a dal, right? So except that the sambar uses tur dal and uses tamarind. A dal in Punjab might use, something else. It might use kali dal, and it might use sort of, another acid, amchur or something like that, right? So that, in a sense, got me thinking about the fact that there's a lot of scientific knowledge about this, but not written in the language of science. It's written in the language of, trust me because I say so, right? That's a very typical Indian mindset of how we pass on knowledge. And the argument was that if you're able to validate it with science and explain it with science, then that knowledge becomes something that's more relatable to the next generation, and is less likely to be distorted, and it's less likely to become pseudoscience, right? We see that all the time, right? There are many beliefs, while many of the ancient beliefs may still be valid, but there are some things that clearly don't make any sense. Like, for example, rubbing the ends of a cucumber is not going to make the cucumber any less bitter, or for that matter, even Ayurvedic ideas of hot food, cold food. We know that food does not change the temperature of the body and so on. So it is just that the idea was to write a book that captured the wisdom of our grandmothers and mothers and their tacit knowledge in a way that's easier for the next generation to sort of take forward and improve on it, right? So the whole idea of science is that it's not a permanent thing that you write a Bible and that's it, right? It continuously evolves, and we keep learning, and I think that was the intent behind writing the book.
Amazing. That's really a lovely story. And I've been reading your book and it's really addictive. I can't keep it down. And every chapter, I'm like telling my mom and having a conversation with her about food and, all of the ways to cook it and all those things. So it's really interesting. And rightly said, I mean, a lot of things we have learned from our parents or our grandparents. And we when we try to explain this to some of our friends or someone from a different culture, we always like, yeah, my mom said so. I don't know why it was or why we actually do it, but that's really interesting how you put it in your book and how you really explain the science behind it and also bust some of the myths around it. So that's really interesting to look at. And there's really not many people who are actually talking about this and dropping these truth bombs when it comes to cooking and food. So we're really glad to have on our podcast today. Moving on, coming right to our topic today, let's start by busting some myths in three different segments. So, first, when it comes to sourcing our food, wherever we source our food from. So, what are the myths that you'd like to address them and buzz them today? And second is the way we cook it. And the third is when it comes to our kitchen appliances. And there's just such a big conversation around this. I was literally having this conversation with my mom just before this recording, and I was like, wait, hold on, I'll let you know when we record this, and we'll circle back to this. So why don't we begin
Sure.
there? And I do have some pointers, but you can definitely
Sure.
like just go with what you like me.
So you wanted to start with sourcing in the sense of where food comes from, right? And I guess, when we say food, where it comes from, I think, you could perhaps also additionally include the element of processing, meaning that, most food has to be processed. I know processing, unfortunately, is a bad word nowadays. But, rice or wheat is inedible without some processing, right? What you get from the plant is this insanely tough husk, which is not edible. You do have to remove it. The question is, how much of it do you remove? I think is the real question, and so on. So I think the most common bits about sourcing in general, right? First is that people blindly believe that one, it must be locally sourced, and that only local is good, and so on. In many situations, it is good. It's the more sustainable choice, etc. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. Okay, I sit in Chennai, right? And if you tell me that I'm only supposed to eat locally, then 90% of what I eat today I can't eat, right? Because you have to remember that 80% of what Indians eat was introduced in the last 200 years. Right, so it's really, so nothing we eat today is technically even local in that sense, right? It's not even Indian, right? Chilies are not Indian, tomatoes are not Indian, capsicum is not Indian, potatoes are not Indian, cauliflower, cabbage, carrot, beans, literally just name 80% of what vegetables you eat today, not of Indian origin. Okay, but why did we start eating them? It's because I think they were more easier to adapt to local conditions, and we grow them at a much larger yield than our own traditional vegetables. Because I think by the time they came, they had already undergone sort of more better artificial selection and more technical agriculture that allowed, say, us to get better yield out of potatoes than from, say, yam or colocasia or arbi, which is more native, right? If you will, right? So that's why, of course, more farmers are going to grow potatoes. Right? The second thing is that potatoes by themselves don't grow near Chennai. They need a colder climate. Right? So if you ask me to eat local, I can't eat potatoes. Right? So therefore, it's not some blind idea that only local is good and so on. I think the better way to think about it is that vegetables or stuff needs to be grown where it best grows, in terms of land use, in terms of water, in terms of pesticides, in terms of all of these things, right? That is how you think sustainably. The transportation is not the problem. Okay? In the entire carbon, cost of the total carbon cost of energy footprint, or the sustainability, the CO2 sort of, of all of these foods and so on, transportation is very tiny part of that entire cost. It's less than 10%. 90% is actually all the input costs, all the stuff that goes into the fertilizer and all the rest of that stuff, right? It's really not transportation at all. And even within transportation, you'd be surprised. The potato coming from Bengal to Chennai in a train is very efficient because the train carries a lot of things. Okay. That's not the problem. Your big basket or Swiggy fellow Instamart carrying it in his bike to your home, that is the biggest part of the carbon cost of transportation. Okay? So if you want to be sensible, don't go to the store and buy. You can actually make a better impact on the environment than by doing silly things like, no, I will only eat local food and so on. So that you can even apply to things like, say, avocados, which are not native to India, right? So people believe that, no, I must buy local avocados grown locally in Bangalore. But the question is that native to Bangalore? Do you know how much water it might need, right? because it is not native to here, there'll be so many other pests that can eat that. So you need a ton of other pesticides to grow it here and so on. So all of that essentially means that the carbon cost of an avocado sourced locally may actually be higher than an avocado that comes from California. And by the way, again, international shipping is remarkably carbon efficient if you count it in terms of one avocado, right? In a giant container, the carbon cost of one avocado is actually very, very tiny. The third sort of very common myth is around organic versus non-organic and so on, whether organic stuff is healthier, more nutritious, and so on. If the problem with the term organic is that it's a marketing and legal term, it's not a technical term, right? Companies will do the absolute bare minimum to be able to call it organic in a specific country. Okay, the European Union has the toughest definition. US has a very loose definition. India has like a completely, anybody can call anything organic. Right? There's nobody coming and checking you. Okay? So therefore, first and foremost is the definition itself is not some technical definition. The second thing is that nutritionally, there has been enough studies that show that there is no nutritional difference between organic and not organic. There is, however, in some cases, if an organic vegetable source from a place where a variety of that plant is grown in a local soil condition organically and so on, it can have a more intense taste. That flavor is actually a function of some of these sort of phytochemicals and micronutrients and so on, but the difference is very small, right? A really nutritious, really tasty tomato is roughly about as nutritious as a not very tasty fat tomato, to be honest. But you might enjoy that tomato, that organic tomato, a little bit more, but you are paying more for it, right? So you have to sort of dispel these myths of about sourcing of foods and so on, while keeping in mind that sustainability and all of these things matter, but it depends, right? You can't go and lecture some poor Indian person living in small town saying that you have to buy organic. It doesn't make sense. They can't afford it, right? And again, we know famously that Sri Lanka made organic agriculture mandatory some 3-4 years back and ran out of food because you can't grow as much crops as you need to feed people in purely organic ways. I hope one day we fix the technology so that we can, right? But that you still have to focus on feeding people first. You can't just say no, everybody has to be organic and so on. So these are just some of the more common bits around, I guess, the sourcing of food itself.
Absolutely. And also, there's another point that I want to add here is about the frozen versus the non-frozen stuff that we get. The frozen versus the market, vegetables or fruits that we get. What do you say on that?
Yeah, so frozen actually is again, as I said, I'm in Chennai, and carrot and peas actually don't grow here. They need colder climates, right? So the closest to Chennai where I can grow carrots or peas is Ooty, which is sort of 500 kilometers away, right? And for vegetables during winter, for me to get fresh carrots, they have to be harvested unripe so that they survive the transportation and they get to the supermarket right before I buy it. Same thing with peas and so on. But frozen peas and frozen carrot can be harvested at peak ripeness and nutrition, and then frozen, and then anything at minus 15 and below is frozen in time, right? It's as good as fresh. And so therefore, as long as you don't have a power cut, in most situations, depending on where you are, frozen peas and frozen carrot are actually going to be healthier, more fresher than actually fresh carrots and so, right? And again, I think there's a broader point, right? Some people will tell you that they don't like the taste of, the texture of frozen vegetables, and the moment it melts, it becomes mushy. Yes, all of that might be true. I think the bigger picture is that I would rather eat frozen peas than no peas. It's healthy, right? In that sense. So in the sense that it's the same logic with, people saying, no, I have some yesterday's sabji in the fridge. Oh, I don't like eating yesterday's food. It is not good as per Ayurveda and all of that. If instead you're ordering from Swiggy, you're lost, right? Because anything you order from a restaurant, 3 to 4 times the calories, 3 to 4 times the amount of fat, more sodium, way more unhealthy than whatever it is you pick from your refrigerator that is a day old. Nothing happens to food in the refrigerator, right? Very little happens, unless you're talking about days and weeks, in which case bacteria might eventually get there and you'll smell it anyway. And anyway, lactofermentation is not bad at all. It's actually good for you for the most part, right? So it's just that people apply these ideas from when there was no refrigeration. in a time when we have refrigeration and electricity. And you really have to just sort of move on with the times.
Absolutely. That was some really great insight, and I'm sure that this really solves a lot of confusion for a lot of people around these things. And it's really, especially the organic part that you address, it's really one of the biggest confusion today, that should we or should we not go for organic. And that's really an interesting way. And I think also I saw you
I
talk
think
about
if
in
you
a
can afford it,
video.
right? Right. If
Yeah,
you
of
can
course.
afford it, by all means, right? I mean, if you're rich enough, you can afford it, and if that matters to you. So I think you can't force sustainability and all these moral, ethical things down everybody's throat. Right? We are all as ethical and as moral as we can afford to be when it comes to food, right? All food is ultimately you're killing some species and eating it, okay? Be it animal or plant. And a lot of that is cultural. You can't just change it overnight and so on. Of course, we all have to do better. But there's no point, lecturing people that I make my expensive vegan protein choices and that's what everyone has to eat, because you're being cruel. I think it's a very stupid way of thinking about this problem.
True, true. And these are really some topics that need to be addressed, and people need to understand the truth behind it, and also learn both sides of it, not just reduce
Yeah,
it to one single aspect of it.
yeah,
So that really helps a lot of our listeners. Moving on to cooking our food. So I've had three pointers that we can definitely discuss. Is one is overcooking versus undercooking of food or vegetables. So where do we stand and how do we really approach it? The second is meal prepping. So like, because a lot of people are working, and they do want to indulge in cooking and have this activity with their families, but a lot of them prefer to meal prep in terms of cutting and chopping the vegetables on the weekend, or segregating those things, that sort of a thing. But how healthy is it, and should we or should we not do it? And the third
yeah.
thing is the topic of sweetness, like jaggery versus honey versus salt, sorry, sugar, all of these things. So if you can just move on to these topics.
Yeah. No, I think if you look at cooking, so first and foremost, I think people forget the fact that all cooking will destroy some nutrients. Um, in fact, but the two questions to ask. One is what nutrients are actually getting destroyed is the first question, but people sometimes just fail to ask. Proteins are not getting destroyed. Carbohydrates are not getting destroyed. Fat is not getting destroyed. Most vitamins are not getting destroyed. Only water soluble vitamins are getting destroyed. Vitamin B and vitamin C. Those are the only two things that actually get destroyed in the process of heating. Okay? The other thing that some things could get destroyed are some of the really tiny micronutrients that are like antioxidants, and those phytochemicals and so on, right? Which again, it's very very trivial, not really important in that sense because you eat a lot of other things, right? So cooking for starters, and by the way, when you generally heat, about 25% of your vitamin B and vitamin C is lost no matter what form of cooking you use. Okay. Obviously, some forms of cooking are milder than others, right? And you'd be surprised to know the mildest in terms of vitamin loss is microwave. So it's the one that will retain the most amount of vitamin B and C and vitamin C. But if you ask people, they'll say, oh, microwave is cancer and all that. It's actually the gentlest way of actually cooking. Followed by steaming, right? The way you steam most water, you're cooking using water vapor, right? That's the next. And then boiling, right? Then the third thing, because you do lose a fair bit into the water itself. And last is like sauteing and then deep frying. Deep frying is obviously 175 Celsius is going to destroy a fair amount of all of the vitamin B and C, vitamin C completely, right? So that's very high temperature. Oven baking, all of that, deep frying is air frying, and all of that is that level. But I think the therefore first and foremost you're only dealing with vitamin B and vitamin C. Okay. The second thing to therefore consider is that you can get vitamin C and vitamin C in a ton of ways, right? You heat something, you squeeze nimbu, you're done. Which is why they say that you don't add the nimbu pani to the cooking, no? You add it afterwards, right? So you retain the vitamin C, right? You drink a little bit of orange juice, you're done, right? Have a side salad, vitamin B is also done, right? So the point is that if you're only worried about water soluble vitamins and instead of naming them, you're just saying, I am losing nutrition and not getting into the details, which is where you get into this problem about, you shouldn't worry at all. Look, without cooking, most things are inedible. And in some cases, like carrots and tomatoes, the cooked version gives more bioavailable nutrients, beta carotenes, and all that than the uncooked version. So cooked carrots and cooked tomatoes are slightly more nutritious than uncooked. So even that idea that raw is always better, not always true. Even when it comes to vegetables, of course, raw dal and raw rice, and they're not even edible, right? They're not even digestible. Okay, so you do have to cook them for you to be able to extract. This is not some simple thing. So don't break your head, right? It doesn't really matter. Okay, your technique of cooking really has no bearing is if you think holistically in terms of my meal consists of things that are boiled, things that are fried, things that are raw, things that are par cooked. If you balance it out that way, then it doesn't really matter. You should not break your head over this. This is not worth breaking your head over. Pay more attention to the balance. Always have a salad. Always have a salad on the side, right? So I think one of the things that used to maybe this is a stereotype, but I think when I first came to North India, what struck me often was the fact that people were happy with a plate that just had rajma, chawal, done, right? Some people, of course, they would have like onions on the side, which I think is very important because it's again a raw vegetable that you get a lot of stuff out of, right? But nothing green, right? But in South India, the meal always consisted of like 5 or 6 things. Okay. And again, you would imagine, doesn't that take more effort to make? No, actually, the individual dishes in South India are very easy, very quick, very low effort. And not only that, a ton of things are prep friendly, which brings us to the prep point of view, which is that the moment a society decides that it's generally a good thing for women to work, it immediately discovers that prep is very useful. Until then, as long as it does not want to allow women to work, it will come up with all kinds of nonsense justifications for no, why we must eat fresh and all that. But the moment they realize that, yeah, I think getting 2 salaries in the house is a good thing, immediately everybody will change their ideas. And South India women have been working for like 100 years. Okay. So therefore, and by the way, it's an interesting thing, right? So rice-based societies, where because you can cook all the rice one shot, the amount of time spent in the kitchen is half that of North India, where you have to make chapatis, like it takes hours to make all of that. And the dishes themselves take a lot of time to make. Right? The individual dish. So therefore, the kitchen time in the South is actually a lot shorter on average, right? So this essentially means that we have 100 years data for saying that prep is absolutely fine, right? People grate coconut and keep in the fridge. People keep sambar powder already ready in the fridge. People make the base sort of chutneys and keep it in the fridge. You can do so much prep work. Cut the vegetables and keep it. In fact, you go to a grocery store here, it will sell you sambar mix, which is the shallots, the garlic, the pumpkin, and these things already cut. Just dump it, tamarind water, and cook dal, and you're done, right? So this is pretty common, right? So in a sense that actually prep is, if prep helps you eat freshly cooked food rather than order out, it's net a positive thing, right? So prep actually helps you be healthier, if anything, right? And again, you lose very little thing in the fridge. The amount of vitamins you lose when you heat much higher than what you lose by keeping something in the fridge over a few days. Very, very little loss, right? And again, you could always address that by making sure that you're having a salad. So I think it's really this entire bias against prep is really rooted more in a generational patriarchal sort of this thing rather than anything else.
True. And also, this whole confusion about by cutting our veggies in days in advance, we are losing its nutrients, or it's not as fresh as it was as we bought
Not as
it.
much. So I think the important question always is, when people say these things, my obvious question to them is, all right, I don't want to say you're wrong. Okay. I want to ask a follow-up question. How much and what exactly? And you'll find that people don't want to get into those details. They're just like, no, I am losing nutrients. What nutrients? Are you losing fat? Are you losing carbohydrates, proteins, fat soluble vitamins? No, you're only at max losing vitamin B and vitamin C, which, by the way, are very easy to add back into food. Right, and then everywhere. So we have not seen vitamin B and vitamin C deficiencies for 30, 40 years now, right? And by the way, right, so the reason why, like for example, people have this problem with refined oil and so on. The FSA standards say that refined oils have to have all fat soluble vitamins included in them, fortified. And so people buying all of these cold press oils, who knows, they're probably they're being deficient in vitamin A if they're not really careful about it. But fat soluble vitamins, especially vegetarians, right? Because a lot of fat soluble vitamins, if you're eating seafood, if you're eating eggs, if you're eating etc., you're going to get it. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're vegetarian, you do have to be careful. You do make sure that you're getting it from all of this. And people now are this, no, refined oil is bad and so on. Are you kidding me? No. For starters, the process of refining is just eliminating things that are not fat, which therefore will not burn when you heat the oil. And if you're in India, we heat the oil to a very high temperature. So if you're frying papad in cold press oil, you just wasted money, and you're probably produced a bunch of carcinogenic substances by heating that oil to that temperature. It's like people heating extra virgin olive oil, right? That's exactly, you mustn't be doing that.
Absolutely. Totally addresses our concerns here. And the last point about cooking is sweeteners. So, how people consider good or, jaggery or honey being a lot more better options, and even the artificial sweeteners like stevia over sugar. So, what
Yeah.
is your take on this? And, how do you address this sort of myth that comes to you?
So I think we'll address the sweeteners, the caloric sweeteners and the non-caloric sweeteners separately. Caloric sweeteners, basically, people who want to fool themselves that somehow jaggery and honey and dates and all of these things are somehow healthier and so on. You're just fooling yourself. Okay, jaggery is like up to 85% the same sucrose. And then even with the only 5% is like molasses and so on. There's like some 1 or 2% of minerals, including iron and a bunch of these other things, which, by the way, to get your daily dose of iron from jaggery, you need to eat a lot of jaggery. You have to get a lot of sugar to do that, right? So in a sense, you have to recognize that everything is sugar. This includes honey. This includes a ton of these other things. And it's not just that. I think people sometimes don't realize that a teaspoon of Chyawanprash has more sugar than a teaspoon of Bonvita or any of the other things that were recently under controversy and so on, right? Like nobody has a problem with that. The added sugars are everywhere as well, right? So I think in general, right, sugar, obviously, I think, all living things run on glucose. It's not like sugar is a villain, okay? But the fact that you're getting it so easily, you're eating something that takes very little effort to digest and turn into glucose, means that you're going to have a spike of glucose into your blood very rapidly. And there is increasing evidence that the more regularly you keep spiking your blood glucose, it has long-term health implications, right? You can't use up all that glucose, so it's going to turn into fat. That fat's going to be deposited into your arteries, so therefore your risk of cardiovascular disease increases, right? And then blood sugar spikes, and then insulin is required, and then your body becomes insulin resistant, and eventually leading to type 2 diabetes and so on. So in general, spiking your blood sugar regularly is not a great thing, and so that is why we need to be moderate about added sugars, because that's the fastest way in which you sort of get glucose, okay? But that is just not enough, right? I mean, even things that are like very ultra refined starch, be it maida, be it white rice, or any starch for that matter, essentially is also going to spike your glucose, okay? About roughly the same as eating white sugar, right? But obviously, when we eat that, we tend to eat it along with a lot of fiber and other things that will slow down the glucose response. The problem with eating a dessert is that it's just instant spike and nothing else. But when you eat, say, potato sabji, right? But there are other things in the potato sabji, tomato, beans, and other onion and all of that. That's all fiber, and that dietary fiber will slow down the spike of glucose in your blood. And so, in a way, you're sort of balancing. You're not eating just plain rice. You're eating rice with dal, which will slow down the spike of it, right? The sabji, the salad, all of these things will slow things down, right? So, or protein will also sort of slow down the spike of glucose and so on. So, in a sense, I think people have to recognize that sugar is sugar. As far as your body is concerned, it can't tell the difference between sucrose that came from jaggery and sucrose that came from white sugar, right? And most people don't even know that brown sugar is refined white sugar into which molasses is added back. It's more processed than white sugar, right? And it's just to fool people. It's true of brown bread as well. It's just molasses. It's really just colored. It's not actually made from whole wheat or anything, because it's very hard to make bread with whole wheat. It'll taste terrible, right? And people don't like buying terrible things. They like claiming that they want to eat healthy things, but they will not buy things that taste bad. And unfortunately, healthy things tend to taste bad. That's just the reality of the world, right? And so this is on the sugar and the sweetness side. Everything is sugar. Ultimately, you have to be moderate about it. I'm not saying don't eat it, by all means, I think there are desserts where jaggery is tastier than white sugar, right? And you use that. There are tea tastes better with honey. By all means, go for it. If you like tea with jaggery, by all means, go for it. Right? Nobody's stopping you. But don't be under the delusion that you are making a healthier choice. The second element is around non-caloric sweeteners. It's a little bit more tricky, right? At this point, we're still not entirely clear what long-term effects it might have, right? Now, clearly, from a science standpoint, these are molecules that trick the sweet taste buds. They fit into the sweet taste buds, and they signal sweetness to the brain, right? And some of these are 200-300 times sweeter than sucrose. Okay, but unfortunately, we have taste buds. We have ways of detecting sweetness in our gut as well, right? So you're like telling your system that you're eating something sweet. You fooled your brain, but that stevia goes to your stomach, goes to your intestine. Intestine is like, I mean, this is like I've been cheated. It dhoka ho gaya because I'm not getting any calories. I'm not able to extract. So then it signals to the brain, yeah, I need more, right? So the problem is that there is now evidence that long-term consumption of these artificial sweeteners could cause cravings that people might end up eating other things like potato chips and other these things to make up for the perceived lack of sugar that you're tricking your this thing into. And we don't know, some of these things like aspartame are also have shown, like, not being great for rats and so on, right? So what I would say at this point, given the knowledge that we have, don't overconsume these things, and don't assume that if you're someone who likes drinking Coca-Cola every day, switching to a diet Coke or one of these things is not necessarily going to help you, right? From a weight loss standpoint, I think there has been short term, yes, there has been that, but there has not been enough studies. There is no long term benefits of this, and so therefore at this point I'd say just be moderate about it. But if you're diabetic, you're pre-diabetic, and your doctor or nutritionist says you have a sweet tooth, consider switching to stevia, you should. In that situation, where consuming sugar has actual potential harm to your body, in that case, by all means, yes. But if you're generally healthy, right, the solution should be to reduce both sugar and sweeteners, right? Don't non-caloric sweeteners. Not to say, no, I will just simply eat all the sweets I want as long as it is stevia.
True, true. And because for years we have been happily going for brown sugar, sugar free, stevia, without having a fear or similar kind of a perception that we have for sugar. And that's what has been going on for years in our families and us going to a cafe
Yeah.
or, going for a coffee, choosing anything. Choosing brown sugar over white sugar, that is like one of the biggest things that
No,
comes from.
I think, as a broader philosophy, right? A lot of these myths persist because most people don't want to make the correct but difficult choice, which is eat less. The cheaper, more attractive choice is alternative. Millet snacks. To make a millet snack edible, they add tons of fat and maltodextrin and a bunch of these other things so that it's edible. It doesn't taste like cardboard. It ends up being actually more unhealthy. Okay, you get more calories. So, and people will say, no, jaggery-based desserts, jaggery-based rasgulla, jaggery-based this. And that, I think, is really the problem, which is that people want to seek the simple solution of finding one villain and saying, yes, as long as I get rid of this, I have done my bit. Now I'm expecting to get healthy, right? But the hard thing to do is actually to say that rather than 2 teaspoons of sugar in my coffee, I will switch to 1 teaspoon over time, right? And that's actually a
True.
better choice and than switching to 2 teaspoons of stevia over a longer period of time.
True, and also a lot of these things are very traditionally rooted into our families or our cultures, and that's why we find it that okay, they've been doing it for years, and that's what I've been told, and I've grown up with that, so it probably would not really affect my health in that way. But to understand
Yeah,
these truths behind all of these things would definitely help a long way.
yeah.
So thank you for
One
explaining
of the
that.
one of the
So
more controversial things that I often tell people in my own family, right? And, which is obviously something that you can only tell your own family. Is that I think the traditional Indian hospitality mindset, particularly when it comes to this idea that you have to stuff your guest for you to get brownie points of being a good host. is, I think, a tradition worth examining, re-examining, in the light of the fact that the single biggest cause of lifestyle diseases is diet. Okay, we see, as I said, we've gone past smallpox and chickenpox and tuberculosis and malaria and cholera and childhood diseases, because we now have vaccines, we have, science has progressed and so on. So now the things that kill us are all diet related diseases. We live long enough, right? And so, honestly speaking, one of the central elements of Indian hospitality is, to put it bluntly, to kill people with food. So, in a sense that, if you go to the West, and somebody offers you a cookie and you say, no, sorry, thanks, it's absolutely impolite to shove it in your face and say, no, 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 please take it. But it's absolutely Indian. No, 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 please take it. If you don't like cookies, let me bring you something else. I really think we have to rethink that, at least in the next generation. I can understand culturally it might be hard for our mothers and grandmothers to do that, but I do hope our generation, when I become a grandfather, I will definitely not, shove food down people's. If they say no, it's no, right? That's good for them, right? I think we should encourage. It should make it easier for people to be moderate about food, as opposed to make it hard. And I think it should be a cultural value that we respect.
Absolutely, that's something that I've never heard of, and it's a very intriguing thought to ponder over with our families, and something really noteworthy to understand right now. Thank you for sharing that with us. And moving on to the last aspect of busting the myths around our kitchen and cooking is our kitchen appliances, and whatever we use in terms of pressure cooking for the first thing, and microwaving, air frying, and also in terms of the utensils that we use, the pans that we use.
Yeah. I mean, quick answer is none of that matters. Use whatever you want. The effect of what you eat and how much you eat is 1,000 times more than whether you did air fry versus deep fry versus microwave versus whether you use aluminum, whether you use non-stick. All those things are trivial things which essentially people who don't want to actually really think seriously about reducing their intake want to find other things as villains, right? Microwave is literally one of the safest ways of cooking food. It literally only heats water inside food, right? And all your heart stents and every implant that surgically people put inside, they're all made from Teflon. Yeah? They're all use PTFE. So if it was your deadly poison, it is a forever chemical and all that sort of stuff, people wouldn't be putting it inside their hearts. Okay? So and so therefore, for the most part, unless you literally end up burning and it is like coming out into pieces and all of that, there is absolutely no risk at all, right? Of course, if you're rich enough and you believe that you have the ability to think about the fact that the production of PTFE is problematic. The company that originally invented it lied about it, and many factory workers suffered from harmful consequences in the production of it, and so on. By the way, no end user has ever suffered from Teflon of any kind. There's been no studies anywhere. Okay? Yeah, you can ethically say that no, you know what, I will not use, right? Because it's problematic. In much the same way that you might use that, no, I will not drive a petrol car, I will drive an electric car, because petrol is bad for the planet. Yeah, same way you can choose to do that, but you don't have to further then say that no, it is actually harmful for you, because it is not, right? And then the other, so many other things, right? A pressure cooker is a classic example, right? It's again goes back to patriarchy and convenience at the end of the day, right? My grandmother, her husband would say, no pressure cooker, you will only cook rice on the open pan and so on. Eventually he gave it, right? As he had more kids and it became tough and so on, he eventually gave in and he was okay, right? And the pressure cooker came in. His father's generation, they were like, no using LPG gas stove, you have to use wood fire. Apparently that is only healthy. So I think every generation resists change, and we take cooking so seriously. It's so central to us that change is hard. And it is always scary, right? Because when you've been cooking, it is always thousands and thousands of years of wisdom. When a change comes, it feels like you're invalidating thousands of years of wisdom. So obviously, it's natural that people will resist. People resisted wood-fired stoves to LPG, right? But eventually, when they realized that LPG was not killing their wives at the age of 40 from pneumonia, everyone switched to LPG because it was cleaner, right? And now the next one was pressure cooker, right? And then eventually, when Indians discovered that, pressure cooker saves 50% of my gas bill, right? Cooking dal on an open pot cooking chana or rajma, you have to cook for 45 minutes, right? But in a pressure cooker, it is like 10 minutes. There's so much of fuel saved, right? So then people realize, nothing wrong with the pressure cooker, right? And as long as it's saving money, it's great. Then suddenly people become rich, and now the cost is not a factor. Now they want to find new ways in which they can demonize things that they don't have to do. Like now, suddenly rich people will say, no, 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 I don't eat pressure cooked food. I will only use open pot and so on. It's all just posturing, right? At the end of the day, people will use what they can afford, and every one of these things is there is no evidence that it is unsafe. And I even say this for I went and did a session for government school kids, right? So these are obviously kids from the poorer sections of society. These are high performing kids, but from poorer sections of society. I did a class on the science of cooking, and I asked all of them, all right, what cooking oil do your parents use? 99% of them, this is South India, 99% put their hands up and said palm oil. Right? Because palm oil is what you get in the ration shop, and it is the cheapest fat, right? And because it is given to poor people, rich people think it is bad, right? See, there are sustainability concerns about palm oil. Palm oil comes from Malaysia, Indonesia, destruction of rainforests, absolutely yes. But people forget that in terms of pure productivity, the amount of land that it takes to grow the next cheapest form of oil, which is groundnut oil, okay, is 10 times. All right. So for the foreseeable future, there is not going to be a cheaper oil than palm oil. And not only that, it is an extraordinarily high quality oil. It's 50% saturated. It does not go bad. These are all things that are important, right? You can posture about saturated, that, all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, these are pockets. So they palm oil, right? And what material do they use? Aluminium. If you ask rich people, oh no, aluminium is poisonous. Are you kidding me? We didn't get to 1.4 billion population if these things were poisonous, right? So I think people have a very distorted notion of many of these things, and much of that thing purely comes from people not recognizing their privilege and recognizing that people eat and cook in such a variety of ways, use a ton of appliances. And our human bodies are remarkably tolerant to a wide range of foods, a wide range of cooking techniques, a wide range of fats. Inuits in Canada literally only just eat whale and seal meat and nothing else, so no vegetables, and they survive. And there are vegans who survive. There are Jains who survive. There are people who only eat fish who survive. There are people who only eat things that do not grow under the ground, over the ground, that rule, this rule. People who eat insects, people who eat palm oil, people who eat only extra virgin olive oil. Everything is okay at the end of the day, right? I think people want to find easy solutions to how they can blame food for their problems. But I think they're forgetting that it is the fact that it's a high calorie, ultra processed food environment, and our inability to be moderate about it, and our inability to also figure out willpower by which you don't snack as much, or that you reduce your intake and you balance out your meal. And there are many other unavoidable situations, both people working and there's no time, and so you have to order food all the time, and there are genetic reasons as well. So it's so complicated that sometimes people want to find easy things to blame, like air fryers and microwaves.
Absolutely, that was really well explained, and this does help a lot of our listeners with all of these doubts. And you also talk a lot about addressing and detecting scaremongering when it comes about food, because there's just so many opinions, so many people talking about all these concepts. And what happens today is, no matter whatever you go and search for, you will find research backing it. So if it's the advantages
Yeah.
of it or disadvantages of it, any sort of, like you just said,
Yes.
if it's about vegan, it's about animal based food, anything, you'll find tons of research, and you'll find people leading with examples with all of these things. So there's just so much confusion. It's really overwhelming to at the end of the day decide that, am I a vegan, am I going to eat animal based food, what am I going to do, how am I going to cook? So how do you sort of address this fear about food, and how to go about these things in life?
Yeah, I think ask me, the simple thing is, consume food in moderation, consume food content and scaremongering content in moderation, right? I think it is. Um, so I think people sometimes forget that just by pointing to some research, get some side direct, some link saying, oh, there is research that proves this is bad. people usually don't read they read the abstract. They don't read the full paper, by the way, right? They don't, for instance, pay attention to whether it's a rat study or a human study, whether it's a meta study or a one-off study, what was the sample size, and what were the actual conclusions, and what do the authors actually say that you cannot conclude, or that whether more research is required. And it is just that I think it is uh, in general, I think this is more of a social media problem than anything else. Right? When I say social media problem, in the sense that we live in this algorithmic sort of news and misinformation environment where sensational clickbait and scaring and outrage and conflict have a greater chance of going viral. I mean, for example, I could say microwaves are safe to use, and that's not viral news. But this microwave caused cancer in this person in this one corner. That is like news, and like people. So the 3% of people who have wheat insensitivities have managed to convince the rest of the planet that gluten is a villain. Remarkable. 25% of people in the West actually buy gluten-free products, which is completely silly. Only 3% of people actually have wheat sensitivities of any kind, and an even tinier percentage have celiac disease, which is full blown, where you cannot eat anything, right? Quite dangerous for you to eat that. Very, very tiny number of people, right? And so, in a sense, I think social media has a tendency to amplify the trivial and also give you a distorted sense of priorities, make it seem like things that are actually rare seem like they are common. That's the problem. Right? People often pass off anecdotal evidence. Oh, it worked for me. I went off gluten and it worked for me. And so I will create this Instagram handle for the next 4 years. I will create 1,000 posts, do these live sessions, and say gluten is the villain, right? And amass 1 million followers, all of whom now wrongly believe that denying themselves gluten is the solution to all problems. This is often the problem of social media, right? And in a sense, I think we as a society have to be mature enough, and hopefully the next generation learns to take virality with a pinch of salt. That anything that goes viral, you have to think twice about whether it's actually accurate or not, or whether it's really common or not, right? At the end of the day, the business model of a social media platform is to amplify rare events and relentlessly keep finding new rare events to amplify. That's the constant novelty is required, right? People need to keep swiping, etc., etc. And while I'm doing that, we have a negativity bias. If I find something, oh, this causes cancer, this causes this, this causes PCOS, etc., I'm going to sit and pay attention. As opposed to, it's the same. 200 years ago, somebody said that when a dog bites a man, it's not news. When a man bites a dog, it is news. It's exactly the problem, right? It's the same thing here. Social media is a series of man bites dog.
Absolutely. That was very interesting. It's a very interesting take on this aspect, and we really need to definitely filter the information that we are consuming, and really do also our own research when it comes to believing one way of eating, one way of living, and that really simplifies it for us. So thank you for sharing that with us. As we conclude today's episode, do you have any last messages, thoughts for our audience?
Now, I would just say, don't overthink food. Humanity has been eating for millions of years, right? And human beings collectively eat such a stunning variety of things across the world, and even within India, there's a stunning variety of things people eat. So you should always take any kind of scaremongering with a pinch of salt. Always ask yourself first, is someone somewhere eating that and being quite normal? People will tell you things like heated honey was toxic, etc. Boss, an entire Mediterranean culture is around baking honey with bread. Okay, their entire desserts are since the Roman times they've been making desserts, and the Mediterranean people live 25 years more than Indians do. Right? So if heated honey was toxic, there'd be no Roman Empire. Okay? So I think people have to apply common sense, and then really just start ignoring. In fact, I think you have to recognize the fact that when people say this causes cancer, you first ignore it. Okay? Actually, there are more social media people diagnosing cancer than actual oncologists. So people absolutely do not understand the definition of carcinogenic, do not understand the definition of the statistics that go into. I'll give you a simple example, right? Uh, you can take, say, some particular molecule, some chemical, right, some preservative, etc., etc., and then you can conduct a rat study where you force fed that rat that chemical for like days, and then said that, oh, there was essentially the cancer rate, which was 0.1% risk of cancer, became 0.2, right? But your headline can be 100% increase in cancer rate, because zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.2, by the way, is a 100% increase. These are just mathematical statistical tricks that people end up sort of falling for, right? So I think, therefore, first, ignore all cancer related scares, ignore all posts that say throw away these things. If you say, please don't throw, there are people who will say that, please throw away your non-stick. No, please give it to me, I will give it to people who deserve it. Please don't throw away anything, right? It's wasteful, right? So in general, stop consuming. Watch recipes, watch people enjoy cooking food, watch people making delicious food. Stop consuming nutrition content on social media. In fact, be included, right? In an ideal world, I wouldn't have to do what I'm doing. There's just so much misinformation that I do what I do. But even now, it's like, trying to use my hand to stop a deluge or a flood from happening, right? Even right now, there is a post that says that you must not drink water standing up, or some such nonsense that has like 1 million likes. And there are posts about dangers of microwave that get 10 times more attention than the video that I made that said that microwaves are actually safe. So therefore, stop watching that kind of content, right? Watch people cook food and enjoy food instead, and eat moderately, and eat a balanced plate, right? And don't overthink this, right? And don't attribute all your problems to one of these things. Oh, I have to eat a superfood, I have to eat turmeric, I have to eat this. None of that, right? Unfortunately, genetics is such a big component of how healthy we'll be, and we really don't have not much of a control over that. What you have control over is your lifestyle. You eat moderately, eat less food, as little as possible, fast when you can, and eat a balanced plate. Eat as much plants as you possibly can, and sort of broad advice, like, say, keep saturated fats to about 10% of your calories, and fats generally to about 25% of your overall calories. Eat more protein. If you're particularly vegetarian, pay attention to the fact that you need to eat more protein, and so on. And try and reduce things that come out of packets, right? The less you eat things that come out of packets, which is ultra processed, you're fine. Occasionally, eating those is fine, right? Don't overthink this, right? There are bigger problems to worry about than these trivialities.
Absolutely. That was a lovely message. Thank you for sharing that with us. And there's so many takeaways for audience and for me also personally to take back up this episode. So thank you for sharing this and gracing our podcast today. For the ones who haven't yet, definitely order Krish Ashok's book, Masala Lab. It's so interesting, and you'll actually don't not find any other book or any other speaker out there talking about Indian cooking and the science behind it. And it's really interesting the way you've put it, and it would actually help you create a lot of more love for cooking and the science behind it. So thank you so much for being here today on our podcast. That's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar, and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast, like, share, and comment on our videos, and hit the bell icon, because you don't want to miss the mind-boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?